Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Chandrani, your MC for today's session. On behalf of the Singapore Management University, the Institute of South Asian Studies, and the Center for Livable Cities, I warmly welcome you to this afternoon's seminar titled Clean Water and Waste Management, an approach to integrated planning of water and sanitation. May I request that you switch your mobile devices to silent mode before we start this event? Thank you. Dr. Ishar Judge Ahluwalia, Chairperson, Board of Governors, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. Professor Rajendra Srivastav, Provost and Deputy President, Singapore Management University. Professor John Harris, Visiting Research Professor, Institute of South Asian Studies. Mr. Wong Kai Yang, Member, CLC Panel Experts, Center for Livable Cities, Singapore. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, today's seminar will examine issues pertaining to clean water and waste management, as well as look into examples of good practices in water and waste management across industry and geographic boundaries. We have with us today a panel of distinguished experts who will share their insights on the topic. May I invite Professor Srivastav to deliver his welcome remarks. Thank you.
Dr. Ishar Judge Ahluwalia, Professor Harris, Mr. Wong Kai Yang, welcome to SMU, welcome to SMU for all our other guests as well. We're delighted to partner with NES and ISIS, as well as the Center for Livable Cities. And it's been a very good trip for SMU in terms of our collaboration, particularly with NES. So thank you for wanting to do your own. So you can actually do all of them here. So. Just a couple of remarks, from our side. Safe drinking water and sanitation and hygiene are really fundamental to our lives, and we take many of these things for granted. But in many parts of the world, clean water, drinking water, and hygiene are critical. We see the crisis going on in Africa right now, with the drought, and. I was born in Lucknow in India, and what we did was we kept our homes very clean. We took the jharu, the broom, and we brushed everything out. So we didn't really care that much about what was happening outside the house. And I think what is important is to not only worry about inside, but what's going on outside, because there are lots of people living, and with the population density, the way it is, it has very, very negative impact. A lot of people who suffer are the people who have the least protection. These are the poor. If I go back now to 1974, I finished my master's thesis actually for systems engineering. But what I was looking at was the relationship between different parts of the system. And in particular, I was studying the linkages between socioeconomic variables and things related to healthcare, things like infant mortality and incidence of different kinds of diseases. And this is 40 years ago, and this is actually in North America. And what we found out there was a very systematic relationship between socioeconomic status and things like infant mortality. If that can happen in a rich country, you can imagine what is happening in this part of the world. So it is clearly important that we look into these, and the poor are vulnerable, the young are vulnerable, and from what I read, women are more vulnerable than men, particularly young and girls. And so this is something that needs to be taken care of. It's a complex issue because it involves us as individuals. It involves the government, the public sector. It also involves the private sector. And now, At SMU, we don't have engineering, we don't have NUS's capability of developing clean water. But what we do have at SMU is the ability to work under the policy umbrella to see how we can manage things. And now Singapore itself has made great strides. So let me just note a couple of things, and then I want to spend a few minutes talking about SMU and how maybe we can pitch in. And when we look at what Singapore has done over the last 30, 40 years, there was a challenge of water scarcity. We used to buy water from the neighbors, and we were faced with constant challenges. But what Singapore has been able to do is to develop catchment areas, develop technologies, desalination technologies, to develop also technologies to purify water efficiently. And so we have now become one of the leading, I guess, thought leaders, if you will, on water management. And some of this we can certainly share with the rest of the world. I've been in Singapore only five and a half years, and I've seen old pictures of Singapore from 1965 era, from around the time of independence. And actually from those pictures, Singapore did not really look any different from Calcutta. And but taking care of water, taking care of sanitation is every bit a technological problem and a management problem. The willpower to do some of the right things. And so the Singaporean-based companies have a lot to contribute. I think the Singapore government agencies that have been involved in development have a lot to contribute. And in very small ways, SMU can possibly contribute. One is we do a lot with data. We have a School of Information Systems has an analytics framework that we use very intensively. And the idea is how can we use information to make better decisions. So as an example, we have the SMU, Tata Consultancy, ICT Lab, where we're looking at the role that information and use of information can play in taking care of urban problems. And sanitation and water and so on are very much urban problems, so we hope to be able to do some of that. Now the interesting thing is that this is an effort at SMU in collaboration with Tata's. A lot of the programming is coming from India, and the applications are in China. So we also hope to make some applications elsewhere. We also have the DHL SMU Green Transformation Lab that is focusing on some sustainability issues, especially when it comes to managing logistics. We have an urban management and analytics lab, and we are now beginning to collaborate with Fujitsu to look at how do we use information again to help out the problems. So what we don't have is necessarily the technology. What we do have and what we work under is the policy umbrella, but we're looking at things more from the management side. How do we manage given the environmental conditions, and how do we manage given the policies that may exist? One last thing, the sustainability issue is very near and dear to us, especially our students. All our undergraduate students have been doing about 80 hours of community-related work. And this has been from the day that we started. You do not get your degree unless you finish that assignment. There are 7 students to date who failed to graduate. They finished everything but this assignment, and we held to it. So with some students, 80 is required, but many students do 500 hours instead of just 80 hours. And cumulatively, they have accumulated 1.6 million hours. And counting, because it's also a larger institution now, so beginning to count faster. We also have an institute for the Lien Center for Social Innovation. And we would, in whatever way we can with our partners, we'd love to pitch in and I'll volunteer some of our students to this effort as well. But thank you for holding your meeting here. And Dr. Ahluwalia, we look forward to hearing you. I apologize, I'm double booked at another meeting, so I'm going to have to be running out after a few minutes. But thank you for coming here, and thank you for hosting the event here.
Thank you, Professor Srivastava. Before I request Dr. Ahluwalia to share her insight on today's topic on clean water and waste management, allow me to give you a brief introduction about our guest speaker. Dr. Ishwar Judge Ahluwalia is Chairperson, Board of Governors at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, where she served as Director and Chief Executive from 1997 to 2001. She was awarded Padma Bhushan by the President of India in the year 2009 for her services in the field of education and literature. Dr. Ahluwalia is a member of a recently set up Eminent Persons Group on India-ASEAN by the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, which is tasked to prepare a report on ASEAN-India dialogue relations. Her other appointments include Chairperson of the High-Powered Expert Committee on Urban Infrastructure Services, appointed by the Ministry of Urban Development India, Vice Chairperson, Global Development Network, New Delhi, and member, Board of Trustees of the International Water Management Institute, Sri Lanka. Dr. Ahluwalia, may I please invite you to share your insights.
Professor Srivastava, Professor Harris, and I can never pronounce these names, Wong Kai Yen, and many other distinguished friends and students. A very good afternoon to you. I feel a little awkward coming to Singapore and talking about an integrated approach to water and waste management. So I must first of all declare that I am here really to learn from the glorious example that Singapore has set in the world. And what I will do is I will share some of the ways in which India is beginning to recognize this huge challenge of water and sanitation that we face. And in that context, what is it that we can learn from Singapore? And interestingly, what is there which in the diversity of India allows us also to learn from each other? Because India is a diverse entity. Urban development is really the role assigned to the state governments. And now with a constitutional amendment, the accountability for delivering these services is with local governments, city governments, but these mandates still remain unfunded because the states have not really devolved resources to the city government. So, first of all, it's not just diverse, but because we are a complex federal setup, things are not as simple. And yet, what has happened, I would say, in the years, in the decade from 2001 to 2011, India saw significant acceleration in its growth. As most of you know, in 1991, India decided to change course and open its economy to trade and investment. Until then, we were a very closed economy with dominant presence of the public sector and a heavily regulated economy. But since 1991, when we decided to begin the process of opening up, it was a very gradual and incremental process of changing our policies. And it took at least 10 years for the government of India to convey a sense of credibility that the change to integrate the Indian economy with the rest of the world was a change that was going to stay. And this also when The policies passed from one government to another, from one party to another, and all along there was this realization and commitment that India will have to integrate with the rest of the world. By 2001, the private sector in India began to put their money where their mouth was, which is in investment in the economy. Because until then, they were talking the language of integration, but they were still used to the old protectionist, heavily regulated ways. And in this period, what we saw was, as I said, increase in the growth rate from 5.5% of the previous 20 years to close to 8% per annum at constant prices. This growth was led by the private sector, and services played a very important role, but there were some industries like pharmaceuticals, auto components, later on automotive sector, which also were involved in this transition. But while this was going on, it seems as if the planners or policy makers themselves didn't realize that they will actually experience this growth, because one can only say that if they realized it, then they would have gone about planning for urbanization. So we saw in this 10 to 12 year periods up to now that there has been a lot of haphazard urbanization, and cities which are supposed to act as engines of growth are indeed providing some agglomeration economies, but they are becoming hugely congested. The state of service delivery has gone down, and particularly with respect to drinking water, wastewater treatment, solid waste management, which are the basic essentials of city living. Suddenly we have realized that we have not paid attention to that. And unless we have a strategy to get our Water and Sanitation Act right, call it sustainability or call it survival, because if you don't invest in water and sanitation, you don't have public health conditions. And no matter how many tertiary level hospitals you may have, how many primary healthcare centers you may have, if the breeding ground is not cleared, your lives are at stake. And I think that realization is coming now. In India, as you perhaps know, is much less urbanized than most other economies we like to compare ourselves with. We have about 33% of our population which is urban today, compared with 47-48% in China, 87% in Brazil, and 75-78% in Korea. These are the large countries that we normally compare ourselves with. So if we are finding the challenges of infrastructure, challenges of skills, challenges of providing employment to our increasingly young population, incidentally, 50% of our population is below the age of 25. And unlike China, where the demographic transition began in 2010, so that the percentage of working age population as percentage of total population began to decline in 2010. In Brazil, it will begin to decline in 2020. In India, it will continue to rise until 2040. So in that sort of context, you can well imagine, for a democracy, for a country which talks of food security, for a country which really is beginning to realize that nutrition security is not just providing food security to your people. If you don't have clean water, this nutrition is going to drain away. So we need to invest in drinking water. Now, the situation on the ground is as follows. If you look at the 8,000 or so cities and towns of India, the water delivery from piped network, from a treated source, if you look at that, the range is from 6 hours per day in the best of situations to about 2 to 3 hours a day every 3 days. So that's what we are talking about. And this when not everybody is connected to piped network. So the poor and the needy and those who live in slums, for example, in Indian cities and towns, actually end up having to buy water from tankers or store them in tubs and buckets and urns, only to throw it away when water, the fresh water arrives. So you end up actually using more water when you don't have continuous 24/7 water. I have my drift into all this, I'm not an urban person, I'm not a water person, I'm not a wastewater person, I'm not an expert, I'm an economist who has been chasing exchange rates and interest rates for most of my career. But I have now switched to chasing wastewater and solid waste. Because I really believe that unless we chase these away and dispose them off, there's no salvation. And how did I come into this? I was invited by the Government of India in 2008 to head a committee on urban infrastructure and service delivery. And my first question was why me? I know nothing about urban development. I was told it's a committee of 11 people, you have enough experts, we want you to develop a vision. And I think that's the best thing that they did to me, because I thought I was ready to retire. And now I feel this load of so much to do, so much to build awareness, so much of what I have seen in Singapore, for example, today, that it's not about new water technology. It's not about whether you go for incineration or landfills, or of course that also matters. But much more than that is the mindset, is the recognition. Singapore even today feels vulnerable. And we have the gorilla in the room and we don't know, how to contain that. So in that context, what I did as a committee member was to try and look for a few bright spots where things were changing. The Government of India had started a program called National Urban Renewal Mission. It's called Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission. Started in 2005, it's about to end at the end of this month. It's a 9-year program in which the Government of India would fund for you as a city it will fund an infrastructure project, providing the city put that project in the context of a city development plan and agreed to do certain general reforms. And if the state government endorsed that plan and also agreed to do certain reforms at the state government level. It was the Government of India's way of nudging the state governments to move on the reform front and get some infrastructure deficit covered. They did not actually go further to say that this infrastructure project would then lead to some improvement in service delivery, which was one weakness of that program. But even for what they were trying to achieve, as we looked around, we found that the cases in which cities were able to transform, let us say, their wastewater scenario through a project in a certain part of the city, or where they were able to give 24/7 water. These were cases where the cities had some capacity to plan and manage, or if the state could hold hands and give them that capacity and bring about the necessary legislative environment change in which they could function, where new technology was typically deployed, and where most of all there was a champion who was leading the project. And that led me, as I reported, as I went from project to project, and I found that some of them were doing very well where these conditions were present. One lesson was that these did not require all that much by way of funding. What they required was really better governance, better leadership. Funding was important, but it was only one of the factors. And then, by the time we submitted our report to the government in 2011, I found that I had got so addicted to spending those 1 or 2 days every month with the urban local officials and learning so much about solid waste and waste to energy options and all those things, which in a way, when you don't know anything about a subject and you go into it, you know, it stimulates you. And you want to learn about it from the user perspective in very simple ways, you know. So you've got these engineers to talk English and tell you, why, you know, what worked and what not, and why should we have stormwater drains, what does runoff mean as compared to, say, you know, you begin at that level, because I was determined to get it across to my readers in my national dailies, in the 2 national dailies, Indian Express and Financial Express, where I had started writing. So I assumed that everybody was as illiterate as I was on these issues. So I will ask the most ignorant questions, get an answer, put them together, get it across to my readers. But in doing so, I must make the field visit, and 2 conditions must be there. I must verify that what they are saying is correct by looking at the data. And second, I must use my economist's knowledge to see that this is economically viable and financially sustainable. And this addiction sort of took me further down the road after the report was submitted. And I've been carrying on writing these columns for now 4 years. And in December, my newspaper decided that these really needed to be put together. And I told them 40 stories out of 8,000 cities, times so many sectors and so many projects. You know, who's going to look at it and say, but then what it forced me to do, my publisher forced me to do, was to put these in the context. So what I have is not meant to be a commercial for the book, but since it's just been released, it's called Transforming Our Cities, Postcards of Change. And in very simple terms, it tells you how a process of change has begun in Indian cities and towns. And I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. I'll give you the example of a small town called Malkapur in Maharashtra, which has 40,000 residents, which is now giving 24/7 water to all its residents and is charging to cover its costs for O&M. And this is the closest that you can come to what we saw in Phnom Penh. And I remember going to an ADB seminar where this waterman of Cambodia had given a presentation on how they had transformed the war-ravaged distribution network of Phnom Penh to now give 24/7 water to all their residents and fully charge for operation and maintenance. And I was sitting there and thinking, you know, maybe public-private partnership might work in India, but when will I see a public sector doing a Phnom Penh in India? Well, the small town of Malkapur has done it. There are other examples, Amravati, another town in Maharashtra. Actually, Maharashtra is one state which has gone about it in a very sensible way. They have taken about 250 of their cities, and they have asked for 3 phases of reforms. So the first phase is water audit and energy audit. Then second phase, you do surveys from consumers, look at the metering, billing, collection. And then in the third phase, they actually help you to plug the leaks, use hydraulic modeling to take up, you know, selected areas and work through them. And there are some successes that have emerged. In fact, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh are now trying similar things in their states. Another model that has appeared is one of public-private partnership. It began with 3 cities in Karnataka, again one of our southern states, cities of Hubli, Dharwad, Belgaum and Gulbarga, where they had selected 4 wards in each city, and this was actually more a technological demonstration project. They ripped the network and they completely put a new pipe network underground, and then they showed how you can actually deliver 24/7 water, but the pricing would then be very high, and that makes it more difficult to upscale it on a full scale. Then the same company, this was Veolia from France, went to Nagpur, and there they attempted first a more integrated management system, so that all the way from bulk source to including wastewater, they approached that. And for the drinking water part, they actually used GIS to do selective replacement and not entire replacement. They ran into some problems because there was political opposition to raising the user charges. You see, what happens is when you have cumulative neglect of 40 years, 50 years, the consumers say, why should I pay you more for the rotten quality of service that you provide me? And the utility says, how can I fix it if I can't cover my costs? So it becomes a chicken and egg problem. You need to break that at some point. And that has been done in Nagpur. They had to go back a little bit, so that originally they had expected to raise user charges much more, and now they are doing it more gradually. But a revenue model has been committed to, which both parties have agreed, and this project is on track and is going on. So we basically have these kinds of models. On wastewater treatment, which actually is even more important than just treating your water to give for drinking water purposes, because we believe that we are naturally endowed with water, and indeed with so much surface area. Yes, we have a lot of groundwater, and then we have rivers and lakes and all, but we have actually returned untreated water to our water bodies, as a result of which we have lost that source of water that we have. So we need a lot of work to do. Today, on average, you have 30% sewerage coverage in Indian cities. And on average, only about 15% of the sewage is treated. So you can imagine the challenge. And as Professor Srivastava said, the really nice thing about coming to Singapore is when they show you these old pictures, 40 years ago, you know, which gives you hope that means it can be done. And again, my own experience at looking at these 40 case studies is that it's not rocket science, and it doesn't take too much money, but it does require the participation of the community. You know, on the solid waste side, if you don't have a mentality of reduce, segregate, recycle, recover, then merely having somebody collect your garbage from outside of your house and dumping it 20 kilometers away is not going to solve the problem. And I think for far too long in India, we have put sustainability as something which the industrialized world wants us to do, you know, to work towards environmental protection. But what we have not realized, and I think this realization is now coming at our own cost as we see more viruses and more diseases coming up every year. There used to be a time when we used to welcome the showers of monsoon, but now we actually wonder which disease they're going to bring this year. So the neglect of public health is something which, you know, we are paying a very heavy price for, and we need to fix that. And for that, water and sanitation, I mean, we should really be going we should have started yesterday rather than tomorrow. And finally, I would end by saying that I expected to learn a lot about the pros and cons of incineration versus landfills, which I have learned, and exactly what is Blue Water doing, and what you're doing about your catchment areas, etc. But what has been a surprise learning is and of course, we've all heard about the discipline and determination of Singapore, one also knows that. But some very simple things, like this no wrong door approach, that I think if we can do, I'm going to go and write about it, and I'm going to say in India, if we can do this one thing, we could really collapse the governmental system into getting activated. That in India, you go to even pay your utility bill. You go to one desk and the man across the desk will tell you, you've come to the wrong building or you've come to the wrong area, you have to go somewhere else, and it's your job to find out where you have to go. And here, the fact that you put the responsibility on the officer to take down your request and say, you will get a call from the right office to tell you where you have to pay. I mean, if we could do that, so much could be accomplished with such simple things. So it's the soft governance and how much emphasis is placed on these little things which together end up making a huge amount of difference. That's been my learning from Singapore. So I really want to, I felt a bit awkward when I saw this title, guest speaker. What am I going to say here? Talking to Singaporeans about an integrated approach. So this is my compliments to you, and I hope that we can learn from you and get moving. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to take 30 seconds. I unfortunately have to leave. Dr. Ahluwalia, this was wonderful. I want you to know that SMU has just started in January a master's program in tri-sector collaboration, public, private, and civil society. Yes. So we're trying to integrate three. We would love to have you as a speaker at some point in time. We'll get in touch with the office. And if there are any projects that our master students can work on, if we can help your office in any way, certainly look at ways. We call these courses the practicum, where we put our theories to practice. So we would absolutely love to work with you, and thank you again.
Thank you. May I just say one thing, since you mentioned PublicPrivate Partnership? One thing that I forgot to say, what gives me a great deal of optimism for India, is that I think where there is demand for good governance, politicians respond in a democracy. And what is happening now is that with the urban voice becoming more strident, with the youth becoming more prominent and forming a larger part of our population, with their impatience and their rising aspirations and expectations, the demand for good governance is very strident. So you are absolutely right. It is not just public-private partnership, but engagement of the resident communities in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahluwalia. May I now request Mr. Wong to come and share Singapore's story on water and waste management.
Okay. Mr. Harris, Dr. Ahluwalia, distinguished guests, I would like to take a few minutes to share with you the Singapore experience on wastewater. solid waste, and water management. Most of us in Singapore will probably have taken this infrastructure facilities for granted. So let me take you back 40, 50 years to the 1960s and 1970s. Singapore was a newly independent nation grappling with a lot of issues that many other cities in developing countries were facing. During those days in Singapore, there was much unplanned development and little control on pollution sources, pollution control. Very few premises were actually sewered, and direct wastewater discharge into the water courses is not uncommon. It's not uncommon, but this is quite common. All right. Now, the decision to provide a comprehensive wastewater collection, we call it wastewater now. We used to call it sewage. It's a more direct, but less probably a middle term. So then the decision was to provide this system to collect, a network to collect, and the treatment facilities to treat them. It stemmed basically more from a pollution control and public health perspective. Singapore is a very small place, with people living in very close proximity. Any outbreak of public health incidents will affect a lot of people in a very short time. So the government saw this and recognized that it's important to have proper handling of our wastewater. So two ministries were involved, mainly, with a lot of agencies. The Ministry of Environment then. It was then called the Ministry of Environment. It is now the Ministry of the Environment and Water Resources. There's a reason for that. So there's one ministry called the Ministry of Environment, the other one is the Ministry for National Development. Basically under them is the Public Works Department. So they got together and they drew up a very comprehensive wastewater collection and treatment master plan. So that's the first stage, draw a master plan. And this master plan touches not only on the laying of the sewer lines and building the treatment plants, which are very important, but it also touches on resettlement, because you have to create places for this thing. People are affected, livelihood affected, and you have to, we also try to sewer up existing premises. In other words, there were houses, there were premises that were not sewered. We would have to go in and try somehow find spaces for the sewers, for the pipelines to sewer these premises up. I guess by now everybody knows that in those days we have what we call a night soil system. You do your business, and somebody will come around in the morning, I think most of the time, and collect it, and then put it into the waste. Somewhere that we don't know where it is. It's extinct now in Singapore. It used to be the vehicle that collect that used to be the vehicles with the largest number of windows, because each compartment is a door. And I remember as a young kid we used to count it. Anybody knows how many doors or windows? 32. That's the capacity of one of those trucks that come to collect the night soil part. All right. Anyway, that's and so we have to do that. We have to train personnel to operate the plants and manage the system. And we also, very importantly, to draw up the enforcement legislation for pollution, for non-compliance. Okay, so there's a whole spectrum of things that we need to do. And because of the scale of the thing, by the way, in the 60s, with the good legacy left by the British, we were already, I estimated we were already about 30% sewer. And then only about 30% collected. So we had a system, but in order to sewer up every premise, it would take many years. And so the whole system, and that was indeed our intention, to sewer up everything, every premises. But well, being the impatient people we are, we cannot wait that long for the whole country to sewer up before we say we are done. So what we did is when necessary, we introduced what we call, what we have as interim measures. Those who are in the line will know, like for example, septic tanks for some of the places, smaller treatment plants, okay? And we even invented this system called the R2 system. I'm sure none of you know that. which is basically a soak away system. You put your waste in the tank and then just soak away. Hopefully it reduces pollution. So these are all the things. We did all this. The main aim was then to prevent direct discharge of our wastewater into our water courses, which otherwise lack at open sewers, as quickly as we can. So these are the interim measures. So as the sewer lines, the sewer network, the main lines reach the places, all these septic tanks, temporary treatment plants will be, phased out. But in the interim, in the 5-10 years, the whole program takes, at least there are some interim measures taken. So that's what we did. So that's in a way, some places are two-step thing, because you can't hope to sewer out the whole country in a short time. All right, and in fact, one of the biggest cleanup projects we had undertaken was the cleaning up of the Singapore River. The cleaning up of the Singapore River does not only clean the river, it cleans its entire catchment. And one of the biggest culprits is unsewered premises. In other words, the waste goes straight into the water courses and goes into Singapore River. The Singapore River catchment is about 1/6 of Singapore area. So it's very big. And it's a pretty big exercise we did. Well, as I said, the rest is history. We did that. Quite a few people got gold medal from the then Prime Minister. And in fact, the marvelous thing is that, in fact, it is now not an open sewer, but one source of our drinking water, Singapore. That's from the 1970s to now, 40 years. So I hope this can be a source of hope and aspiration for many cities who would naturally face problems with cleaning up the water courses and things like that. Not that it's an easy task, but it can be done. So right now, let's come back to bottom base. Singapore is 100% sewer. Every premise is linked to a treatment plant. So there's no more discharge of wastewater into open water courses. And in fact, there's a bonus on this. Because, I will talk to you a bit later, we can conveniently progress to the next important step, the important stage of tapping on this treated effluent to create our new water. Without this system set up, we will never get new water the way we did it. So we'll touch on it a bit later. Okay, then I switch over to solid waste disposal. For solid waste disposal, which is basically household garbage or refuse. It's the same premise, the same principle of basic consideration of pollution control and public health. Can you imagine, in this hot, humid climate, there's collected garbage and waste from household everywhere. In fact, right from the very start, the government decided that household refuse would be collected daily. Daily, regardless of whether it's a public holiday, Christmas Day, Chinese New Year. So every day somebody will be around the house to collect it. And I think rubbish collection in Singapore is now privatized. Okay? But the collection standard is the same. It's collected every day from the household. Okay, then you collect it, what do you do with it? I'm not sure whether those the younger one among you would remember. Singapore actually had 2 rubbish dumping grounds. One in Lim Chu Kang, those who know Singapore, and the other one in Lorong. Both of them are now closed. It's very simple. You can't find enough land for people to stay on and to work on, much less for places for you to dump the rubbish and all that. Alright? So they're now closed. And all our household rubbish is now, that's where we're talking to Dr. Luang, is that we are now into incineration of our refuse. All household rubbish is incinerated. We have 4 incinerators to take care of that. Alright? The great thing, or the thing that decided on why we go incineration is that it reduces the residual ash to about 10% of the original. And not only reduce it, it stabilizes it. So what we did is that we burnt it, we incinerated the ash, we collect it, and we use it as landfill on an offshore island called Pulau. The last I heard was that it's supposed to be now a very thriving eco island. And the birds are coming back, the natural vegetations are coming back. Oh, it's not that. Incineration, the other fear is the emission from the chimneys, from the incineration plant. we have very strict control on the quality of the gases, effluent emission from the chimney. So that's control, so you don't get pollution from there also. And another added bonus is that incineration also produces energy, which is, the new term for incineration is waste to energy. So we do produce energy. I think our incineration plant produces enough energy not only for their own use in running the plant, but also to sell it back to the national grid. So they have actually surplus. So that's an advantage of incineration. Okay, so briefly, that's the way we collected our waste. And now to the other topic that everybody talking about, water. Water has been a top priority strategic consideration from Singapore from day one. It still is, and it has been. Because we know that we are always short of water. And we have worked very hard to ensure the adequacy of supply. We do have a long-term water agreement with our neighbor Malaysia. Those who have been around for the last 10 years in Singapore, though sometimes, when the relationship is not that good, somebody will say we'll cut off your water. Okay, but indeed, even if you have a contract, the contract will expire. In fact, the contract will expire in the year 2061. Alright, so after that, I don't think it will be extended. Not because the Malaysians don't like us, but I think the Malaysians will need the water as much as we need the water. So I think since it's their water, they're not about to sort of extend. So we are working also very hard on developing alternative sources and supply. Okay. We collect as much of the rainwater that falls from the sky as possible. We were deprived of this in the last few months until the last few days. All right, but we try to collect this with water. And if you notice, we have dammed practically every river in Singapore, and to make them into impounding reservoirs. So we collected a lot of water there, and the most famous is probably the Marina Bay Reservoir. And to me, it's probably the only urban reservoir in the world. Right in the middle of the city, that's your reservoir. I always tell visitors to come to us. You don't believe me? I think we are drinking from this pool of water. Okay. Okay, the other one is, Singapore is an island. It is surrounded by seawater. So naturally, desalination will be a very attractive, alternative. Indeed it was, and we looked at that very closely. In the earlier days, in the 60s and 70s, when we started looking at it, the most prohibiting factor is cost. It costs a lot then to take the salt out of the water, of the seawater. I think it still does, even though the costs have come down tremendously. So that's why I think we have two desal plant just in case, like the last few months where the rainwater desalinator will come down, we can use more of the desalination. That's the strategy. All right. So, well, the alternatives we look at are not that great. So we are left. What we did is we tried to exploit technology. Technology in the sense that, we know that we are 100% sewer. Can we somehow make use of this, instead of collecting, treating all this wastewater and sending it back to the sea? So we looked at how we could treat the wastewater to what we call drinking standard. All right? We started as far back as the 1970s, looking at this. But we didn't have much hope, much success because the technology was not there. It was only in the late 1990s and 2000s, where the membrane technology came in, that we really had a good opportunity to use technology to treat the wastewater to drinking standard. All right, and that is where new water arrived. And that's how the whole process is. Now we call this whole thing, what we call is closing the water. Basically what we did is we treat the water that we drink and use, then we drink and use the treated water again, and again, and again. It's a closed loop. Alright? So that's what we do. The aversion to it is because it is the gap factor why we drink the water. Yeah. But that's not, we go over that. And in this closed loop system, in theory, we will not run out of water, drinking water, regardless of the weather condition and any climate change. As you can see in the last few months, we didn't have water rationing at all. In fact, I think the politicians were not even worried, even though the public message is please save water. Okay? It is also at this stage where we put water and wastewater planning under one roof, the POE. So this is so that the complete water loop can be managed. You see, previously we were treating wastewater as pollution control, not source of water. So we decided that the whole entire water loop should be under one roof, PUB, who can therefore manage the entire water cycle properly. Because they need to use the wastewater to treat it to drinking water, and it's a complete loop. So that's how we do it. Right now, the coverage is 100% supply to all households. In fact, I think, if I'm not wrong, any household, even they can't pay the water bill, is never deprived of drinking water, even though their flow can be restricted. It is that important to us, right? And in fact, our core point is the water is drinkable directly from any tap. Very easy to say, it's not that easy to do, and also to gain the confidence of the public in doing it. Even in Singapore, some don't do that, okay, even though most of us can do it. All right, so the supply side, more or less, to me, is managed. Then you talk about the demand side. Okay, in demand, we were trying to work with the public, the people, to reduce supply, reduce the demand of water usage, reduce consumption, and all that kind of stuff. Right? And one of the greatest things we do is instead of alienating them from the water treatment, we bring them in. We have a public education program. Get them aware of the program that we have, ask them to participate in the cleaning up of the river, the cleaning up of the water courses, and get them to take ownership of this very scarce and vital resource and value it like they value their own property and money and all that. All right? Water will always be a strategic issue to us. All right? And I think, well, with this very short coverage of the waste and the water problem, I will leave it with that. Thank you very much.